Hello, everyone, and welcome to the World Class Stand podcast. Our special guest today is Suzanne Nelson. Sue, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
No worries at all. So, you've been involved in football with biorhythms and biorhythm research.
Yes.
Can you just tell us a little bit more about what exactly is biorhythms and how you got involved in it?
Well, I tell you what, do you mind if I give you a tiny bit of backstory, because then it will
Absolutely.
all make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I did nursing, and then I came out of nursing and I got into computers, as in I just did the marketing side.
Right.
Met my husband at the Christmas do, and that was December 87.
Okay.
And he was a computer programmer. So we got together, and I then realised that he was a huge Arsenal supporter. And of course, I'd never really had anything to do with football whatsoever. And I remember him saying, "Look, do you want to come to a match?" And I thought, "Oh, I will do. Okay, let's do that." So we went down to Highbury, and he took me to the, the clock end.
Yeah.
And it was all standing back then.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him putting me in front of this sort of metal bar and saying, "Look, this is the safety bar. So if we score a goal, you need to hold on to that." And of course, they scored in the first half. And I just remember this surge of people, and sort of going straight over this bar. And honestly, I was thinking, I hope they don't score a goal again, because I was thinking, I don't want to go through this. But that was the last time I actually went there after that. I did go back for seating. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we got together. I had my first child. Got married, had a child, and then I wanted to lose some baby weight. So I joined a hotel which had a gym, and I hated going. And so I did that for several months. And then when I came back one evening, I watched a documentary on, back then it was either Graham Obery or Chris Boardman, the cyclists?
Yeah.
Anyway, they were talking about, he was talking about how he trained. And he says, "I do less training now, but I've had better results by using biorhythms."
Right.
And I thought, well, I'd never heard of biorhythms, because we are talking about probably about 93.
Okay. Right.
So they said, "Well, tell us about biorhythms." And he said, "Well, basically biorhythms are rhythms within your body, and it starts literally from the day you're born. So there are several biorhythm cycles. The one that he was most interested in was the physical cycle. So if you imagine you're born, day one is 0, mm-hmm. and this physical cycle is 23 days. So you go up in an arc, you then go down past, you have to go past the critical line, which is 24 hours. That goes from, the critical line is really important because it's the transforming from, the sort of transfer from going from the positive phase to a negative phase, and then the negative phase to the positive phase, and that takes 24 hours, okay?
Right.
And that really puts the body out of sync. So he said that what he did was that once he learned about the physical cycle, that you have these critical days, and that when you go into the negative cycle, part of the cycle, you get very tired, and he used to pick up injuries. And I thought to myself, I didn't pick up on the injuries bit, but I thought, hang on. So he doesn't train as much, but he gets better results. And I thought, I can use that for me losing weight. Mm-hmm. So there was nothing obviously on computers back then. So I went down to London. I actually had to order a book on biorhythms because there was nothing around, absolutely nothing.
There's no Amazon back then, right?
No Amazon. You guys are so lucky.
Do you remember where you ordered it from? I'd be interested to
well,
a blast from the past.
Well, it's just one of the major, it probably was Waterstones or something down in London.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had to wait for it to order in. And when I read it, at the back of it, it had these acetates. So when I was trying to work out my own personal biorhythm, I would have to put all these acetates on top of each other, which took ages. Mm-hmm. But so I did that for several months, and this is the big thing, the light bulb moment, was so I didn't have to go into the gym so much, and things did work so much better. My husband came home from an Arsenal match, and he said to me, "I just don't understand." I said, "What?" He said, "George Graham's team that he'd chosen sort of, I don't know, nearly 2 weeks ago. He used the same team today. Last time they were fantastic. This time they were rubbish. He said, but they were the same team. I don't understand. But to me, that was my light bulb moment. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see what the team was back then and the team was today? So obviously I had to get the 11 members, the players.
Yeah.
But I knew they were the same. So I basically had to get the 11 there, but have to work it out. And it took me ages, because it took me ages to do my own. And because my husband was a programmer, he said to me, look, he said, I can write your program so that you can put as many players in the computer as you like, and then put what day you want to see where the biorhythms are. So that's what he did. It took him quite a while to do, but he did it. I mean, he's a brilliant programmer, I've got to say, brilliant programmer. So I went from absolutely not being interested to football, wanting to watch every match. But you see, I look at it in a very different way to you guys. So instead of me being absolutely loving my team.
As a fan sort of thing, you're looking at it more scientific.
Yeah. So I was looking for things like injuries, and I was looking for if they sort of said, the pundits. They didn't call it pundits back then. I don't know what they used to call them.
Ah, you're right, actually.
They used to call them something else, but the people that used to sort of talk about what they were doing, and I would listen to things that were unusual. So if they said, "Oh, he seems really slow today," or "He looks a bit erratic today," I would then write their names down, find out their date of birth, put it in the computer then, and have a look, see what their biorhythms were. But what I picked up on was the injuries. Okay. So whereas I knew about them being negative, physically negative, I picked up that it didn't matter what cycle on a critical day, they would also get injured on the critical day because of the transferring from the positive to the negative to the positive. Now, are you understanding that, guys?
Yeah.
So is it like a zero? Is it a kind of your equilibrium almost? And then you've got a plus and minus?
It's a bit like having the equator around. You've got the southern hemisphere and the northern hemisphere. And then you've got a 24-hour period. 24-hour periods from when they're transferring over.
Okay.
So it's like a wavelength sort of thing, positive and minus.
It is, exactly. And sometimes what happens is that they say that the body goes out of sync at that time. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's actually really important that we know what time you're born. So like, for instance, if you're born at sort of 8 in the morning, so it's 8 till 8, okay? And usually in that time period, if you're going to have a football match, it'd be a 3 o'clock or a 5 o'clock. Mm-hmm. So you're in time. But if you were born at 9 o'clock at night, that's 9 till 9. I would put you as the next day.
Right.
Do you understand? Because it's from 9 till 9. You don't have a match from at 9 o'clock at night. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you do. So it's actually really quite important to know, the time of birth as well.
Yeah. So it's not just the dates in a cycle; it's the time of the cycle as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I was going to ask, you mentioned about the physical cycle, which is 23 days, right? Yeah. What about the intellectual cycle as well? Because things like in the game, which are important, like decision making, and there's lots of things that goes on intellectually for maybe taking on board tactics and things. How did that work into the biorhythms with intellectual and physical peak at the same time? Is that something that was kind of built into the analysis?
Yeah, well, I tell you what, it's very interesting you say that, because you get your captains that are chosen. Okay? Mm-hmm. So someone like, I will bring up Brian Robson. Now, he was a fantastic captain, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And when you think about his personality, it's very stable, isn't it?
Yeah. So
you do have what's called a dominant cycle. So you can have a set of twins, but although they're born on the same day at the same time, they can be very different, can't they? And you'll find that one of the children will have a different cycle dominance to the other one. So if we talk about Brian Robson, his major cycle that affected him actually was the physical. That's why he had so many injuries.
Right, okay.
So when he was intellectually positive and negative, he actually stays quite the same.
Right, okay.
That's why they make great kind of like managers and also players, because they stay stable and they stay clever all the time. Okay?
Right.
Now, if I can go to Paul Gascoigne, who I absolutely love, and I've got a story about him. His dominant cycle was the emotional cycle.
That doesn't surprise me.
Yes.
You say that, yeah.
Now, I'll give you one example of that, is that when he had his terrible knee injury I know the date because it was I got married on that day. It was the 18th of May, 1991. And I don't know if you remember, I've actually looked at the clip recently. You may not have seen it, but it'd be interesting to look. It's up there on
Was
YouTube.
this the cup final where he dived into the tackle? And
Yeah, but he did some really silly things before that. Now, his emotional cycle was in a trough. And when his emotional cycle was in a trough, it made him very erratic.
Okay.
When his emotional cycle was positive, peaking, he'd get hat tricks. Because he felt confident and he felt, so when he's down, he was kind of like maybe emotionally down and not feeling as confident, so therefore going heavily into a tackle and being a bit erratic.
Is there anything to counteract sort of the negative side of that then?
Well, all you can do is, my personal view is that if people start to use this really properly, if that was now, I would get hold of Paul and say, now listen, Paul, if you don't even have to tell him, you don't have to say to him, you are emotionally in a trough. What you say to him is, look, in the past, these are the sorts of days that you act a bit silly. Now, if I see you acting silly out there, I'm going to sub you. Now, there's a psychological thing with that, because you're almost being told in advance that you might get pulled up if you act silly. So your brain slightly changes.
Setting the expectations, isn't it? So
self-awareness, I suppose, as well.
Self-awareness. Is that exactly that? Yeah. So you can counteract it in certain aspects.
Okay.
So, like, for instance, if someone's intellectual cycle is negative and you know that they are a bit not thinking, you kind of like say to them, today I really want you to focus more than normal, and you'll find that they do.
So is there, you talk about the intellectual cycle, the emotional cycle, are they still one cycle, or have you got more than one cycle for each individual?
Well,
do they kind of track each other almost? I'm guessing not.
You know that you've got these 4 cycles that literally all start off on the same time, but there's different.
Yeah.
So the physical cycle is 23. Your intellectual cycle is 33. Your emotional cycle is 28, and the intuitive one is 38. So they literally, from the day you're born, they go up and down. And have you actually seen the cycles that I put up?
I've seen some, yeah.
So you can see that they all, because they're different lengths.
And it looks a bit like DNA, I thought, like the spiral.
Yes, absolutely. So it goes up and down until you die. It doesn't change at all. But because the cycles are all different lengths, they kind of like cross over with each other. And there are certain times where there'll be a player that's the day is the physical cycle's in the trough. The intellectual cycle is critical because it might be going from a negative phase to a positive phase in that 24. And then there'll be another cycle going from positive to negative, and you can have what I call a triple high-risk day. Now, if I had an ideal world and everyone was on board with it, I would rest that player.
Right.
I would say, because, they do rest them, don't they?
Yeah, squad rotation's massive.
They have now, squad rotation is fantastic, but why not rest them when they're high risk?
You mentioned in the chat about Jamie Redknapp mentioned this recently on a talk show about being rested. What was kind of the situation that would go on there where you'd maybe pass on advice to ask people to get rested, and just talk to us about that situation.
Well, I think what I'd have to do is, when say a club wants to take this on, you will really have to sit down and talk to people about how you can use this to your total benefit for certainly the players, and then it's a knock-on effect. Because I look at it this way: if you don't know in advance, say, because no one knows anything at the moment about it, no one really follows it. If you knew in advance that one of your key players was a triple high risk, I would go, right, okay, what do I do? Do I play him and risk him getting injured and him being out for 8 months? Or do I rest him and slightly change the field around, and you've got him, you know that you're not going to, he's not going to be injured? Because it seems crazy when people are out for like 8 months.
Yeah, it does,
Yeah.
With the data, say, that you must have collected, did you find like these negative periods with injuries, were they constant? Would you say, he's a triple threat this week, and they actually go out on the field and actually get injured? Wasn't
it around about 70% correlation?
It is. Yeah. I'll tell you why I know it's 70%. Because after I did some work with Euro 96, which I'll tell you about, I went to Lilleshall Hall. And back then, Lilleshall Hall was in Shropshire, and it was the School of Excellence. And I'd rung them up to say, look, I've done this work for Euro 96. Could I come up and talk to you about it? So I met a guy called Chick Wilkinson. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. He says, when you come up, I'm going to give you a test to take away with you. I said, that's fine. So we got up there. I explained basically what I've said to you guys, but we went into real in-depth about the cycles. And he gave me a list of 150 players. And what it was player number 1, he gave me his date of birth, and all the 150 players were non-contact injuries, all done in the month of June. So I knew, so in my computer I put in player 1, date of birth, and then the month, June. And on my report, I put player 1, he was high risk on the 3rd of June, the 7th of June, the 20th of June. So I then got that back to him, and he rung up about a week later, and he said, all these results are amazing. I said, what was the results? And he said, well, it was a 70% hit. Now, I remember being a bit disappointed because I wanted it to be 100. Yeah. And he said, don't you realise, 70% is fantastic. Mm-hmm. He says, I'm going to take it down to Lancaster Gate, which was down in London. He says, we're going to have a meeting. And he said, I'm going to talk about it to them. He said, because I really think we should take this on. Anyway, I was so excited. And then after the meeting, he literally phoned me up. I knew which day it was. He phoned me up and he said, I don't know what to say to you. And I said, well, just say it straight. And he said, they didn't want to do it. He said they didn't understand it. He said, I wish now I had got you to come down with me. Mm. He says, because I was trying to explain it to them. He said they didn't get it. And he says, and I tell you what, he says, the doctor said, why are we talking about this? We're trying to reduce injuries.
Right, yeah. Not realising the correlation between high-risk days and player injuries.
He just said they didn't get it.
This is the FA now, yeah?
This is the FA.
Football Association, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm.
So I sort of said, and at the time I just thought, I knew it was too forward.
Yeah.
Well, like you said, that percentage hit there, even if you don't get it, so to speak, that's a massive figure, isn't it? A massive figure of correlation. You're gonna look into it. I think I would look into it. I'm quite shocked how high it was, to be honest. I didn't know. I didn't look at the charts before we come on.
But you've got to remember, we're talking about 96. Some of those people in that room had never even pressed a computer.
I was going to ask about that. So we zip back to 93, I think you said you had the computer program.
Yeah.
So you had the product essentially. Were
Yeah.
you a consultant at this point? In that, or were you
Well-
looking just to dive into it at this point?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. When I realised that there was this correlation, I said to my husband, I said, "Do you know what? There's in the papers we had seen that the England squad. I saw the headline: England squad plagued by injuries. So that was like, okay. I thought, I wonder if I can help here. Now this is when you had Brian Robson and Terry Venables. So Brian was his assistant.
Right.
So my husband came home one day and I said, do you know what? I said, I'm going to write to Terry Venables. And he said, what? I said, look, I'm going to write to him and see whether I can help him with his injuries. And I remember him being he said, Terry Venables, God. He said, do you really think he is going to take any notice of what you're going to send? And I said, well, I'll try. So anyway, I got to tell you, I wrote to him 5 times. I got nothing. I then sent him a folder, and I thought, if I do a little folder, do a little graphs, he might understand it more. I got nothing. And I remember ringing up his secretary and saying, do you mind if you send me back the folder? And she said, oh, yes, I will. She sent it back. And I was hoping there'd be a letter that said, sorry, but no thank you, or whatever. I got nothing but a comp slip. And I tell you what, I burst into tears. Because I was just it was so frustrating for me. Anyway, what happened was, you know when you have to, they have to play to try and get into the Euros, don't they? They have qualifying matches, whatever.
Yeah.
So England were playing, they were getting ready to play to try and qualify. And Brian Robson, he was a player manager at Middlesbrough. And what happened was he got injured with the England squad, training with them.
Right.
And there was a big hullabaloo because he was obviously not going to be able to play for Middlesbrough. So I thought, oh, I'll do his biorhythms. Because they put the dates of when he got injured. So I put his biorhythms in, and he was physically in a trough. So I thought, you know what, if I write to him. So I wrote to him, and I remember putting in a letter, I'm going to phone you up on Thursday at 3:00. So honestly, that's what I did. I phoned at 3:00 thinking I wouldn't get anywhere. And his secretary said to me, I'm glad you phoned. He's expecting your call. He's in a meeting, but he wants me to call him out if you ring up.
Okay.
So I thought, oh, this is great. So he came on the phone. He said to me, look, I've seen the letter. I can see what you've been doing. He said, I've always known there was something, but never knew what it was. He says, because Alf Ramsey knew about biorhythms. He says, but he didn't go into great depth with us. He said he mentioned biorhythms quite a lot. He said, but I didn't quite understand it. He said, so I am really interested. So he said, would you do, because I explained to him on the phone that I could just do him a diary. So it would be in advance. He'd get it, say, a week before. So when they start training on the Monday, it would just have a list of the players that were high risk on that day. So he didn't have to work it out. I'd done all the working out. Yeah. And he'd just have the names. And I met them down in London because I had to get all the dates of birth off them and everything. And I then produced the diary. And he did it for about 3 or 4 months. And he would phone me up, and I remember him saying to me things like, you put down, I can't remember the names of the guys, players. He'd say, you put this guy down. I said, yes. He says, well, he says, I could tell he just was struggling. So I went up to him and I said, how do you feel? And he goes, oh, boss, I feel like my legs are like lead. And he goes, look, just rest. And he said, I've had a lot of players like that. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we carried on. And then what happened was England were going to... so it went on for quite a while, actually. But I can't remember the timeline. I'm so sorry. But it was... England had qualified, and they were meeting for the actual tournament. And it was about 5:00 in the evening, and my daughters were 2 and 4. And that's the sort of hour where they're tired and they're hungry.
Yeah, chaos.
They biorhythms across everywhere.
Oh, my God, they never stop. But anyway, what happened was, because my husband was a computer programmer freelance, agencies always used to phone up about 5:00 to sort of say, what's his availability, etc. And I'd already had 2 phone calls, and I was so fed up. And the phone went again. Obviously, all landline. You can't see who's phoning you. So I picked up the phone and I said, yes! And he goes, is that Suzanne? I said, yes. Look, this is a really, really bad time. I'm sorry, can you phone back? He went, no, I can't. This is Terry Venables. And I'm just about to leave my office because I'm going to the television studios about football. I said, right, okay. I said, hang on. So I put the phone down. And of course, there's my little girl screaming and everything. I scooped them up, took them into the living room, put them in front of the TV, Rosie and Jim, I think, back then, with snacks. And I said, now sit there, girls. Went back and I picked the phone up. And honestly, this is no word of it. I picked the phone up and I said, hello. And he went, you must think I'm the biggest bastard in the world. And he said, because I've ignored all your letters and even your folder I ignored. And I went, listen, darling. I'm just thrilled that you phoned me. And he said, look, Brian's told me all what you've been doing for Middlesbrough. And he says, do you think you'd do it for us for Euro 96? And I said, well, of course. So I'm thrilled to do it for you. He says, well, look, I need to get together with you to just discuss it, what I can do, the advantages I can have with it, and also give you the list of the players. I said, fine. So he phoned me up another time and he said to me, listen, I'm not going to send you the list. He says, I just don't want anyone knowing. He said, I'm not going to fax it to you or anything.
Oh, was this prior to the squad being announced?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so I actually got the squad about 2 weeks before it was announced.
Wow.
And it was really funny because, the papers, they all try and get double guess.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, no. No. Yeah,
So you knew
right.
it wasn't coming home 2 weeks before the squad was announced.
No, I didn't know that. But it was really funny. So I was able to get all the diary ready for them. But you know what? You must know this. They're so superstitious.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
it seemed to be.
It's a big part of football, and we've spoken to some players where they'll put their right sock on first, then their left sock, right boots, left boots, etc. So there's always that element of superstition that's always been in football, I believe.
Most sports, yeah.
Well, do you know what? They would not allow me to do the whole tournament. Brian said, will you just do it up to the the quarterfinals?
Why do you think that was then? Why?
Well, it was
Superstition, basically.
It was literally superstition. He says, we don't want to jinx it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, that's fine. So literally, I did it up to the the quarterfinals for them. And when they got through, he phoned me up that evening. Brian, he says, oh, everything's going so well, it's fantastic. And of course, back then, he didn't want anything faxed. Also, Terry said to me, I'm not going to tell the players what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
He says it's just going to be between Brian and I. And I said, well, that's fine. And he phoned up to say, could you give me the next 3 or 4 days? Because I had to send it to them by post, because they wouldn't let me fax it.
And the fixtures come thick and fast in a tournament, obviously, yeah.
So I had to tell them over the phone. It was really funny. I had to do like 2 days or 3 days over the phone, and then I sent it to them.
So you were
Steve. Security-wise, then, can faxes be intercepted? Is that one of the reasons why?
Well, he was just worried that. Obviously they were in Burnham Beaches Hotel. That's where they all met up there, and of course it would have had to go through to the reception and everything.
Okay, yeah.
And they didn't want to go down that route. So I had to do this, when they have to sign for it.
An NDA or something like that, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, right, okay.
So I had to do that.
So you were kind of working remotely before working remotely was a thing? Because you were literally over a phone call doing this work.
Over the phone call. And everything was very much over the phone.
Yeah.
Because, again, they just didn't want people to know. It was really bizarre.
Did you notice with your data then, you give Venables, did you notice any changes in that tournament which might have been directly influenced by Biorhythms? Yep.
One of my favourite ones is that I would give him the diary, but I would put little notes at the bottom. And again, I have to talk about Paul. But he, on the Thursday before they had the Switzerland match, it was on a Thursday and they were in training, I had actually said to them on the phone, I said, look, you see I put a little note about Paul. Now, his biorhythms are very similar to how they were when he injured his knee. His emotional cycle was in a trough. His physical cycle was critical at this particular time. And I said, I'm really worried he's going to injure himself in training. Mm-hmm. And he says, well, what shall I do? And I said, well, look, just monitor him straight away. As soon as he goes out there, monitor him, see what his character's like. Anyway, that was probably Wednesday night. So on the Friday morning, the headlines were Gascoigne pulled out of training. And they had him sat down on a coffee table with a brolly, and you could see the England squad in the background. And they're saying, and of course they were trying to surmise, is he injured? Is he going to be able to play? And the quote from Terry was, we pulled him out of training because he was acting in an irrational way and we thought he'd better sit down. So it was basically what I'd written. I said, if he acted in an irrational way, pull him out of training. So, of course, so I know that he used it for that because it was in the headlines. Yeah. And also they used it for Teddy Sheringham. I think, who did I send the video to?
Yeah, the video, the clip you sent, yeah.
Yeah. Because he was Teddy, when they were going to play Holland, he was physically in a trough, so I knew he was high risk. And Brian said, well, I've got to play him. I can't not play him. I said, well, look, when they are physically in a trough, they get very tired near the end of the match. I said, so if they're going to get injured, it will be near the end. And I said, and if they're playing really well, I said, why don't you sub him? Mm-hmm. I said, at least you know in advance, so therefore you could have someone on the subs bench that you've already got a plan in your head. Yeah. Anyway, of course they were 4-1 up, weren't they?
Yeah, it was that famous victory. Yeah.
Yeah, so they were 4-1 up. So they subbed him, I think it was the 18th minute.
Okay. Really?
18th?
Yeah.
Wow.
Were they already a couple of goals up by then? Or?
Well, no, it was 4-1.
Yeah.
They were 4-1. So, I'd said to him, if they're doing well, why don't you sub him? Yeah. So they subbed him. Of course, in the tunnel, they interviewed him. And in that clip, they said, why did you substitute Teddy Sheringham? And he said, was it because he had a yellow card? Apparently he'd picked up a yellow card. And he goes, no. He says, we now know that the last 15 to 20 minutes of a match, they start to lose their energy. I can't remember exact words, but it was basically, he didn't want to say, because they're high risk for injury.
He was being quite elusive, yeah.
Right. Yeah, he wanted to sort of say, well, they lose a sort of like...
Yeah. Sorry, do you know you said 18th minute? Do you mean like with 18 minutes to go?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Yeah. Right, okay. I thought it was
18 minutes into the match is pretty early, right? So,
no,
that's what I thought.
Yeah, because it's the last 15 to 20 minutes.
Right, okay.
Because I remember him, he set up Shearer, didn't he, for a goal.
You're testing my knowledge now, Steve.
Nice little games. Well, that's English, so I suppose.
Stuart Pearce in that game? Did Stuart Pearce score in that game? He played. I think he played.
I can't remember.
But I'm not sure he scored.
Yeah, famous game. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they did really well in that game.
They did, yeah.
So that was great. So I know that they use that because I know why he was substituted. Mm-hmm, yeah. And in fact, I'm really thrilled these days when I watch matches now. They do a lot of changing near the end, don't they?
Yeah.
Which is actually really, really good. But what you've got to do is you've got to make sure that you're not going to... I'll tell you what has happened quite a lot is that they've brought on a sub who is critical.
I was going to ask about that, yeah. The reverse, isn't it, basically?
Yeah. And what's happened is if you do not warm up a player who's high risk, they will get injured. Mm-hmm. So you're bringing them on for, say, the last 20 minutes. He's not being warmed up, how he should be, and you get usually a hamstring.
Yeah. I think one thing that obviously will help with biorhythms is the amount of substitutes that you can use. Back in the 80s, you would maybe get one or two substitutes. Now you can have 5.
Yeah.
So that kind of opens the door into, the possibilities of resting players to get those marginal gains. And like you say, if players are in a trough, then, you can take that option to rest them.
Yeah.
So at this point, your name must be pretty out there in terms of producing results in the industry of football. What's happening around this time for you personally with your sports science consultancy?
Well, no, you would think that, wouldn't you?
Okay.
But you can imagine during Euro 96, it was literally no one, they didn't want anyone known. So what I did was and the strangest thing is that once they'd finished, Terry went over to Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Did he was manager of
I think he was Australian manager.
Australian
wasn't he?
manager
Yeah.
at some
Yeah.
point. I'm not sure if it was
And-
then, but it might have been.
Well, apparently it's to do with some tax thing or something.
Oh,
sort of
okay.
like
Yeah.
had to suddenly disappear. And
Don't blame you.
yeah, and then everything went. I wanted a rest as well because I found that it was all a bit too much. So I had a bit of a restful period. So what I did, and Brian went very quiet, and I wanted to concentrate a bit on my children. So I didn't push it. You get this thing. You go, well, I'm just going to leave it for a while. So I did leave it for a while because I wanted to, because the children.
Sorry, is it all right if we just go back there? Because we was
sure.
talking about Euro 96, and you mentioned up until the quarterfinals you was working with the team. Obviously, England went out in the semi-finals, Germany on penalties. Was there anything said at that point? Because obviously he was helping the team up until that point. They obviously progressed through the tournament. Once it come to the semi-finals and they went out, and was there any kind of insight you feel that you could have offered towards the penalty
absolutely.
takers?
I know where you're going with this.
Do you know what? Well, I'll tell you where you're going with this. I knew that there were certain players that do not work very well when they were emotionally in a trough, and it was Gareth Southgate.
Oh wow!
So Gareth Southgate on that day, he was intellectually, emotionally, and I think physically in a trough. And I remember saying to, I think I said to Brian once, I said, I know I can help you with the injuries, but I can actually also help you with, when you have to do the goals, what do you call it? The
Penalty kicks, yeah.
penalty kicks.
Yeah.
And I just remember him saying to me, I don't want us to confuse any more. He says, we'll definitely use it for the high risk for the injuries. He says, but I don't think we can go into the penalties. And I remember thinking to myself, oh no, because I actually cried when he got up to go. I thought, no, I'd rather have had David Seaman. Honestly.
Could have been interesting.
Honestly, I swear to God, because he was like, the whole of that squad on that day, Gareth Southgate was the worst.
Right.
The worst biorhythms on that day to take a penalty.
What about Stuart Pearce? Because didn't he also miss?
No, he scored
No,
that day.
He scored.
Yeah.
No, that
Oh,
was
right,
another
okay,
time.
yeah. No,
That was
another
1990.
time. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
That
another
was his
time.
redemption penalty, if anything.
That's one thing I wanted to ask. I'll ask it later, but yeah.
Yeah, but that was that. But I remember, do you remember he had that sort of pizza advert afterwards, didn't he?
Yeah, with
Yes,
the bag over his head. Yeah.
But not only that, I got him with, in the September, it might have been a bit later than that, I got him with Norwich City. And when I was doing some work for them, they wanted to do an article on me, the local paper. And I did this thing that I told them about Gareth Southgate, and when they did the article, they had this great big picture of him missing the penalty. And although I said it, when you say things sort of like, you talk about everything else, but this is the one thing they pick up on. And it said, and all they had was saying that I cried because I knew he was going to miss the penalty.
Yeah.
Because I just knew he was the worst person to take a penalty.
Yeah.
So can you imagine what I would love to have done? I would have said in advance, I said, look, if it goes to penalties, these are your top 7.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
And what would you rate that by? Because you mentioned, would that be a mixture of both emotional and intellectual, or would it be...
Yeah, because when you are emotionally positive, you're very confident. Physically, obviously, you've still got the strength, haven't you?
Yeah.
And then intellectually, because as I say, you'll find out which players is their dominant cycle. So if someone is intellectually positive, you'll find that even if they might be physically going a bit low, the intellectual thing keeps them up. So your dominant cycle, if you're positive, it actually sometimes slightly counteracts if you're physically slightly low, not in a trough, but when you've gone over the line and you are kind of in what I call no man's land.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so surprised that they sort of like dismissed that idea for penalty taking in particular, because England are like notoriously bad at penalties when it comes to end of tournaments or semi-finals, quarter-finals. But you think they try anything? So maybe something different might have worked. You never know.
But what you can do? Say England is playing Italy, and you've actually got a date. You know the date that they're going to be playing. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you can actually tell the manager in advance who would be the best players to take a penalty if it goes to penalty. And then what I would do as a manager, I'd be getting hold of those players and saying, I really want you to practice your penalties.
Yeah.
You don't even have to tell them you're going to be playing, because if you go to penalties, it's actually going to be you guys that are going to be doing it. But you would have in your own mind who are going to be the best players to take a penalty.
Yeah. Yeah, I think...
It's like planning. It's like forward planning. You can do so much forward planning.
Definitely, football sometimes is about marginal gains, isn't it? And incorporating stuff like this into planning and kind of knowing where players are on their kind of cycle could help with those additional things. And it'd be interesting to look into the data as well around, the recent penalty shootout in... Was that Euro 2020?
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know what was it. Saka, Rashford, and who else was penalty?
Sancho, I think it was it?
Sancho, yeah. It'd be interesting to know their biorhythms at that time.
Yeah.
So
that was what I was going to ask you. Actually, have you ever gone back to the real memorable football moments throughout history and gone right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. You can go back in time. Because it's a numbers game, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a numbers game, so you can go back, obviously, right to when you're born. So you can look at all sorts of things like that. Oh, yes, I have. I've gone back and looked at players that have had terrible injuries.
Okay.
And in fact, I am not going to mention people on here because it would just be too awful. But there are so many players that have ended up having to stop playing football, and it's because they've had such a terrible injury and they were injured on their high risk. But I don't want to put that out there because that's not fair, because that would make that person feel really bad.
Adds a different dynamic to their career then, doesn't it? As if a
Well,
what-if kind of thing. So Jamie Redknapp, for example, was notoriously injured quite frequently. I mean, I guess a lot of it's to do with his biorhythms and maybe some not, but can people just have really bad sort of cycles?
Well, no, Jamie, his dominant cycle was his physical cycle.
Right.
The same as Brian Robson. So they were always affected by their physical cycle more than other people. That their cycles, their dominant cycles, the emotional, intellectual one. So I remember once with Jamie watching a live match with him, and he came on in the second half, and he literally started to run, and his leg, he popped, and I thought if they hadn't warmed him up, and he was high risk. And he was critical. And this is the other thing about critical. When you are critical, if I see an injury that's in the first half, say maybe 17 minutes, 20 minutes, I can guarantee you they will be on a critical cycle. Because the critical cycle can go any time during a match. Mm-hmm. But the physical cycle, in a trough, is normally the last 20 minutes. Right. So I can almost tell when I see, he's off at 13 minutes, he'll be critical.
Yeah.
Because remember, it is 70%. Now, this is the other thing, is there have been some things on the internet where people have done science on biorhythms. But I've noticed that these papers were done in the 70s and 80s, and I'm thinking, hang on here. I found it difficult in the 90s with a computer. I don't know what they had back then. And the thing is, if it is 70%, which to me it's all, in fact, sometimes it's higher, but if it's, say, 70%, we'll put that, what would happen if someone was doing a study back in the sort of 70s, 80s, and they were having to use the numbers, or they're having to use, I don't even think they had acetates. Can you imagine if the first, so let's take this, say 100, and they've got 100 people that were injured. Now, what would happen if the first 30 were negative? Now, they would probably give up. They'd go, oh, God, this is obviously rubbish because they haven't done the last 70.
Yeah.
And this is why when I got that 150 from Chick Wilkinson, I remember thinking, God, wouldn't it have been awful? Because I think it's something like, I think I did the numbers on this. It was, what's 70% of 150? It's something like 105. Wouldn't it have been awful if the first 45 were negative?
Mm-hmm.
So do
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
so I often think that some of these surveys or scientific things that have been done in the past, they might have been unlucky that they got the ones that were the 30%.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
want a bigger data pool to run the numbers or whatever.
Oh, you absolutely do. That's why I've been doing it over 30 years.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know.
I would still imagine though that if it is 70% accurate, you'd have to be pretty unlucky to get that kind of draw. You'd still get at least maybe you might get a lower pool of percentages, but yeah, if you did 45, you'd at least get
Well, you'd give up. I would. If the first unlucky, we're talking about the extreme unlucky ones, I'd be going, oh, this isn't worth it.
yeah.
But you really do need to, because I mean, the first thing I do is when there's been a match, I have a look to see if anyone's got injured. And this is the thing, if anyone's out there listening to this that is a sports writer, when you're interviewing the backroom staff, the managers and coaches, if you can try and get the actual day that they got injured, because the worst thing I get is when I see, say Saka's, he's not playing next week because he injured himself in training. When in training? I mean, I need the date.
And the time, presumably, I guess.
Well, no, just really the date. I just really need the date.
Okay.
Obviously, I want the time of his birth, which would be really accurate, although I think I've already sussed him out. But
Because he's out at the minute, isn't he?
yeah.
For a considerable.
Have you seen? Do you know I've done? Funnily enough, it's 150. I've done over 150 players,
Yeah.
I've seen on your TikTok.
and these are the
Yeah.
ones. These are the headliners.
Is that for today's game?
Yeah.
150 players now, if you're doing it for this
Up
season?
to now, but actually even more than that. But do you know what? These are the players that I've been able to actually. They're in the headlines, and I've been able to find out the exact date, because there are some that are in the headlines, but they don't tell you when they're injured because they were injured in training, but they haven't told me what day, so I can't use that because I can't pretend or sort of surmise it might have been Wednesday.
Yeah.
I have to actually have that date.
So it's
Yeah.
valid, obviously.
Yeah, it's really valid.
Is this using the same computer program that was designed all those years ago?
No. Oh no.
I assume it's moved on a bit.
It's going to be that's obsolete. But you know what? This is the other thing: is you guys today can look at your own biorhythms. There are apps out there that you can put in your own data. You'll have to ask your mum what time you were born.
I think I was born 3:15 in the afternoon.
Oh,
so
really?
yeah.
Oh yeah, that's an awkward one, isn't it? Because you might have to swap yours a little bit, actually.
Yeah.
Because you could, if you were a high level, football player.
I don't think anyone's in danger. High
High level podcaster.
Yeah.
But well, no, because because ideally you want them to have been born first thing in the morning.
That's the ideal, is it? Right?
That is the ideal. Anything past sort of like 3, 4, 5, you're looking at maybe having to swap them to the next day. Only really for the critical day, obviously. I'm talking about the physical cycle. There's a few days that you can sort of move around.
I was 5 to midnight, so I'm
There you are.
Well, 5 to midnight. Oh, you'd be the next day.
okay.
So if you're born on
Is
the
that
5th,
class is very early in the morning then, or is that?
no. Oh no, we're talking about the ideal time would be 6 a.m.
Right, okay.
6 a.m. to 6 a.m. because then we know that a football match is either at 3 o'clock or 5 o'clock or at the latest 8 o'clock, but you're still in that cycle. Okay, so anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. One thing I was going to ask is because it seems like quite similar to maybe astrology and things like that.
It's not at all.
I know, but because it's kind of like cutting edge stuff and kind of ahead of its time, really. were those the type of comparisons you were getting in like the early 90s, or because obviously you have to be a bit open-minded to think about these things. Well, some of the critics kind of say about biorhythms, or whether what kind of pushback did you get from people in the football circle, because they would have been, you know, obviously maybe a bit harder to convince on things like that. So yeah, what would kind of the pushback, the general pushback you get?
That Jamie Redknapp clip, he was talking about the stars, wasn't he?
He was talking about, like, you know, something to do with the moon, and it was obviously not to do with that, but
that's quite sweet when he said that.
Yeah, well, I can't think of the word now, but they were downplaying it, weren't they? Trying to almost ostracize the whole concept.
But I'll have to tell you very quickly how biorhythms actually were founded.
Mm-hmm.
Swoboda was a surgeon. He was an ENT, ear, nose and throat surgeon. I worked in theatre for 2.5 years as a technician, and I know that we would have a list of, say, 12 children, all around about the same age, all around about the same weight, all coming down for grommets, or actually normally grommets they were. And they would, even I knew this, that sometimes there'd be 3 children all in a row that you could anaesthetise quickly, they would recover quickly, they wouldn't bleed. Then you get the odd one that couldn't anaesthetise them as quickly, couldn't arouse them as quickly to wake them up, and they would bleed. Now, that's how I saw that. Now, this guy, Swoboda, what he did was, with his ENT list, he realised exactly the same thing, but this is way back. So he started to monitor, why is it that some patients need more anaesthetic, they need more painkiller, they bleed more. And he was in Austria, and there was another surgeon in Germany. They both came up with the same thing at exactly the same time. So it was Swoboda and Felice. They put their papers in at the same time as well, with exactly the same date, which was 23 days. Mm-hmm. So even at different countries, they realised that there was this cycle. And they realised that when a patient was positive, they healed quickly, they woke up quickly, they could put them to sleep quickly. When they were in a trough, they had to have more anaesthetic, and they used to bleed. So they knew that. So, because do you know what? In Japan, they use it all the time. In Japan, when you go in for a routine operation, they book you in on day 2 of your physical cycle.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Wow.
So they will not book you in a trough. Obviously, emergency, you can't do much about it, but routine operations, they book you in when you're positive.
So obviously it's applied elsewhere within medicine and different concepts, but you're bringing it to the football world and applying it to injuries specifically. But what do you make of those? Like what kind of, like, did you have much push back then, or was it just kind of?
I tell you what I had. Once I got in front of, so now, how I got with Norwich was I wrote to. He was a guy called Mike Walker.
Mm-hmm.
Again, completely ignored me. So I wrote to Delia Smith, and Delia Smith had just become one of the directors.
Right, yeah.
And I said to her, I wondered if you can help me. I said, I've written to Mike Walker and he's just ignoring me, but I really think I could help to reduce injuries. Anyway, I got a letter back from her saying, I have had a word with Mike and he is going to phone you. And she says, I'm having trouble even getting them to change their diet because she thought the diet that they had in obviously their canteen was not good enough for them. So she was hoping to change it. She says, I'm having difficulty. She says, and I'm the director. So she says, I can imagine. Anyway, he phoned me up. He was not happy because obviously she'd got him to phone. So when I went up there, it was a bit sheepish, really, because I just knew he wasn't quite on board. He got better, I've got to say. He did get better. But it was trying to get everyone to come on board. And it was such hard work. And
I could imagine.
And they kind of like he gave it a try, but I knew from day one I was going to get nowhere.
Yeah, because if you're not an open-minded person, then you're gonna wait for the first sign of it not working and then be like, yeah, I told you I was right, type thing, and dismiss it. But yeah, it's interesting to see that once you get the concept and the evidence in front of people get the buy-in then, isn't it? And that's where they can start applying it. Like you said with Brian Robson, originally Terry Venables kind of rejected the idea, and then you managed to show him the data with someone who he trusts. And then
I met up with him again, Terry, in 2001. He wanted to do it again. Some of the reasons that things have been halted is purely on my side, because when you have a young family, something suffers, and I thought, I am not going to let the children suffer. So I actually took a back step on quite a lot of things, because I met him down in London with one of I don't know who it was, but it was someone, a friend of his or something, and he loved the concept and he wanted to move forward in it, and then something actually happened to me. So I had to say to him, I have to put this on hold, and he was fine about it.
Yeah.
So I left that. But I tell you what, I've got to tell you about Graham Taylor. He was at Watford. He's such a lovely man.
England manager, ex-England manager.
Yeah, he wasn't then. He was Watford manager.
Okay.
Such a lovely man. And I remember ringing him up because I'd done a very similar thing to Brian Robson. I said, I'll phone you at such and such. And I remember him being a bit sceptical on the phone. And then at the end of it, he said to me, okay, I'll give you 45 minutes. I remember thinking, does he measure everything in 45 minutes? But anyway, I got 45 minutes and I got the second half and I got extra time.
Nice.
So when I went, they took it on board, and I went down, and I would go to some of the training sessions. Now that is extraordinary training sessions, because you get these young players that arrive in these amazing cars. They go into the training to get changed. They come out, and I'm not joking. They really, I'm sure it's changed now. But they really treated them like 14-year-old boys. It was extraordinary how they went into being 14-year-old boys. So there was lots of banter and lots of silliness. And I used to think to myself, I can't believe that they've gone from men to boys, and then they go from boys to men when they go out the door. But I'm sure it's changed.
That's an interesting observation, actually, because I suppose that does come across in things you see from those players who played in that time, the banter, the stories, the things they used to get up to, the changing room pranks and all that kind of thing. So yeah,
it was very, very much like that. But I actually ended it at Watford because Graham said to me, Suzanne, I wonder, would you be able to tell me if I'm going to have a car accident next week? And I thought, oh dear, he doesn't get this.
Right, so you thought he was like a psychic or something? Yeah. Is it like a Mystic Meg or something like?
But I'll tell you what I did tell him. In Japan, do you know they use it for articulated lorry drivers? So when you go to get your load and where you're going to deliver, if you get like a red card like this, they have to put it up there so they can see it in their windscreen, and they've reduced accidents by 65%.
Wow. Okay. How does that work exactly?
Well, it's because they've realised that if they're obviously they know their biorhythms, and if that driver's intellectual cycle is low or they're critical, they go, right, okay, you've got to think more.
Right, okay. So it's kind of to help jog their intellectual side, and would emotional side things building up? Because
well, definitely if it was critical. As I say, any critical day is a red
stuff
flag
like
day.
Road rage and things, I'd imagine. If you're emotionally in a trough, then you may, be a bit more angry on the roads or whatever.
Every day on the M4.
But I think see, this is the thing about the Japanese. They really embrace things so quickly.
It does. Yeah.
No, that's really interesting actually, because they've got a totally different kind of culture over there as well, haven't they? Where if you have a sleep in work, they deem that as you must be working really hard, so you've actually exhausted yourself and you're sleeping on the job. Whereas if you see out over here, then
I know,
you might be getting your P45. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
that's interesting.
you sitting down with Graham Taylor during this conversation in terms of him, asking that of you, or is this?
So actually, I gave him that story.
Yeah.
I said, Graham, I'd be able to tell you that when you have to focus on your driving, but I can't tell you that you're actually going to have a car accident.
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, I see. And I said, do you really get this? And he says, no, not really.
He's honest, I
So,
guess.
and also, again, I don't think he had enough support from the people around him as well. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's about timing, and it's about being open and understanding. I think back then it was very, very old-fashioned. Yeah. Everything seemed very old-fashioned back then.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So
was this was this time around with John Barnes? Was he playing for Watford at this period of time?
Sure.
Do you know, I can't remember. I don't remember John Barnes being there.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think I'd have remembered him. So I remember Ginola.
David Ginola.
I was up at I've got to say this story. I was up at Everton, and I was going to be doing a meeting, and I arrived there, and they all looked a bit pensive. And I said, is everything all right? They said, oh yes, I'm afraid your meeting's going to have to be delayed. And I said, why? And she says, the FA have just turned up to do a drug swoop on all the players. And so all the players are having to give a urine sample and whatever. So they said, look, they got hold of the guy I was going to meet in. He said, look, come into my room, which was a medical room. And he says, set up what you want to do. And he says, and he said, I can't give you a time. But they gave me a coffee and everything. So I sat down, set up all my stuff. Anyway, the funniest thing was, there was this noise. I turned around, the emergency doors. Mm-hmm. It opened up, and there was Paul Gascoigne. He'd obviously been in the shower. He was naked with just a towel around his waist. And I went, oh, he says, what are you doing? I said, what are you doing? And he goes, I'm hiding. I said, why are you hiding? He says, I'm hiding from the FA. He said, I've been a really naughty boy. And I went, oh. He says, can I hide here with you? And I said, yeah, okay. So I got him to sit next to me. And of course, this was after Euro 96. So I said to him, he says, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I'm showing them. I said, you feature in this, because I actually had him as examples. Oh, he was so sweet. And he said, oh, what do you mean? And I said, look, this was you, and I told him about Bio, and this was you on the 18th when you did your knee. I said, do you remember being pulled out of training in the Euros in training? He went, yeah. He says, I thought the gaffer was really annoyed with me. And I said, no. I said, it's because they were actually protecting you. And he went, oh, so of course we were there. And then all of a sudden I heard this, there you are. And I turned around and I said, I'm sorry, it's my fault. I said, I've been showing him about biorhythms. He says, oh, all right. Then he says, now come on then, we need you. And he got him and he gave me a little wing. So, oh, thanks for that. And, but can I tell you,
go on.
About 2 weeks later, he got transferred to Barnsley.
Right, okay.
Or was it Barnsley? Or Burnham? Ooh.
Go on, test my knowledge now.
No, is it Burnley? I think he got transferred to Burnley about 2 weeks later.
Did he fail his test, did he?
Sorry?
Did he fail his test?
I don't know. But I just thought it seemed a bit strange that he did get transferred. Actually, it was Burnley.
Yeah.
And I just thought, oh dear.
Because he tells whilst he's at Everton, a story about I think it was like sleeping tablets, sleeping pills, and he played a game, taking too many of these pills, got him out of the match, scored a couple of goals, I think, but he doesn't remember the game at all. Wow. It's a story I've heard him tell, yeah.
But you know what? He's so lovely. So lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was my meeting with him. Oh, can I just tell you a quick story about Ian Wright.
Ian Wright.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Did you want to go into got Glenn Hoddle here? You've had a...
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. Do you mind? Oh, I'm sorry. I apologise.
No, it's fine.
So I'm flicking.
Probably easier for you to go in sequence anyway, and then...
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry. So after Euro 96, obviously Glenn Hoddle was named manager. And where I was did my gym, it was a hotel, and I was swimming in the pool, and I looked up, and it's really strange the way they do it. It's called Sopwell House, and it has you can see people eating, so they can see into the pool.
Right, yeah.
So I was swimming along, and I could see Glenn Hoddle arrive with Arsene Wenger, and I thought, oh my God, this is my opportunity, because I just finished with. Well, I'd had a bit of a rest, actually, so it would have been around about September time. So I wanted to go and see the new manager. And because he was actually there, I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. So I had a little phone. I mean, literally, it was a phone that was text or phone. You couldn't do anything else on it. And because everyone knew me there, because I was at the club for such a long time, I said, dear Miss Hoddle, do you mind if you could have a quick word with me after Arsene Wenger? Because I did some work for Terry Venables, and I'd like to do some work for you. So I got one of the receptionists to give it to him in the with his meal. And then later on, I got myself changed, went round there, and I said, I knew I had to collect my phone, so I knew I could have this meeting. And Arsene went off, and I sat down with him and told him what I'd done with Terry. And so I went through it with him, and then at the very end of it, he said to me, you know, I think it's really fascinating. He says, but I've already committed myself with Aileen Drury, who was the faith healer. And he said, there's so much controversy over her. He said, if I add you as well, he said, I just think it will tip it. So he said, I'm so sorry I can't use you. But, as we see, with Jamie Redknapp, literally this week, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
And he said that he wouldn't play him because he was high risk.
This was around the time that Glenn said something not good, and they hit the press, didn't it?
Yeah. He did say some bizarre things. I'd say. Which kind of got him out of favour with his England job, wasn't it? But he seems. Besides that, he does seem like someone who would be open to it, as well as Arsene Wenger as well. I would have thought maybe he would be someone. Did you try to approach Arsene Wenger at all?
Yes, I did, and he actually said, I wrote to him, and he wrote back, and he said, I've heard about biorhythms, but I don't wish to use them.
Wow. Okay.
So
Because he transformed the English game pretty much, didn't he, with diet and things like that. And I would have thought that would be something he'd be interested in.
And he coached Japan as well,
Yeah,
so I was quite surprised.
Yeah.
He's brought some of their techniques over and implemented them in the game.
Yeah.
But no, I really would love to. Well, of course, I'd have wanted to work with him because my husband was an Arsenal fan, but he didn't. You can't force people to do it.
No.
Yeah.
Well, whilst we're on Arsenal, you mentioned your Ian Wright story, so please do tell us more.
Oh yeah. Oh, I got it. Well, the hotel that I used to do my gym in. Well, at the same time that I was there, I'd been there about a year or two, and I remember being in the pool and hearing this kerfuffle, and the whole Arsenal squad came in, and I was thinking, what are they doing here? And I thought they might have been there just for the day, because sometimes they use the hotel for sort of like, they're going to meet people or something. Anyway, what I found out was that they had a fire in their training facilities, which apparently was down the road, and they'd got with the club to say, can we use the facilities while the fire and we're rebuilding? Mm-hmm. So I had the Arsenal squad there for about 2 years. And I remember saying to my husband, take a day off next week. Why don't you come down? Because the Arsenal squad literally use the facilities every day after training. Yeah. And he wouldn't do it. Do you know why he says I wouldn't be able to talk?
Oh, right.
He says he was so starstruck. But Ian was absolutely loving. I must tell you this story. He had, it was round about sort of September time, 97 it was. And I used to talk to all of them. But, because you're there all the time, it was very like friends. And Ian said to me, he said, I'm having a terrible time at the moment. I said, why? He said, I can't seem to get my goals to do the Cliff Baston record.
Right.
So I said to him, I tell you what I'll do. You know, I said, I've got a crystal and I'm going to put a wish on it for you. And I'm going to give you this. And I said, I want you to take it with you to the match. This was round about Tuesday, I think it was. And it was the match on the Saturday. Anyway, my husband had bought a seat where, you know, when they transform the clock end into a seating.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you bought a seat, and he had his own seat with David on it.
Oh, right, okay.
So I had my brother-in-law there and his friend there. So they all had their own little seats. Anyway, on the Wednesday or something, so I gave him this crystal, and I said, look, take this crystal with you. You'll get your goals. He goes, will I? I said, yes, you will. So anyway, I didn't think it would happen, but I just thought it will. Anyway, when I got home, I said to David, oh, you know, I've given this crystal to Ian Wright. And he says, all right, okay. He says, I can't go on Saturday. He says, I've got to go to America. He says, do you want to take my seat? And I went, yeah, absolutely. So I didn't know until the Saturday I was definitely going. So I got there, and the thing is, you know, everyone knows each other, don't they? Because they've all got their own seats.
Yeah.
So I sat down, and everyone was going, you know, who's this? And they said, oh, she's Dave's missus. Anyway, so they started chatting, and I think it was Steve, no, it would have been Paul, said, she's given Ian Wright a crystal so that he gets his goals to get the cliff.
Get the record, yeah.
Get the record. Well, you can imagine what happened. I mean, I literally had the worst bantering of, you know, don't be stupid, this is ridiculous, you know, and all this sort of thing. Anyway, of course, he scored his first goal within like 16 minutes, first half. Then he scored again in the first half. So not only did he equal it in the first half, he
broke the record.
He broke it. And of course, those guys, they went from, I went from zero to hero. And that's all they talked about. They didn't talk about the goals in the end. They talked about that I'd given them a blooming crystal.
You should have took some crystals back next week and charged them a tenner each. Yeah.
But you know what? I saw Ian at the gym, and he came and gave me a kiss, and he said to me, I can't believe it. I can't believe I've done it. And he says, can I have another wish on it? And I said, yeah. I said, what do you want? He goes, I want to be picked for England, because apparently he hadn't been picked for England for a while.
Yeah, he
was a
wasn't
strong contenders at that.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, so anyway, he got picked, but I think he then got injured. Oh. So, but he did get picked, so the wish did come on his next crystal.
Oh,
but I'm wondering whether he remembers that. I don't
Well,
know.
I was going to say, he obviously has his own, or is on a particular podcast or show called The Overlap, and be great if he ever did refer to that situation on that. Or
well, when we get him on the show.
Yeah, or if we get him in the hot seat, yeah. But if
we will ask him.
If anyone out there listens to this, you know, see if we can get Ian Wright to talk about it on
Stopwell House.
Well, we'll have one of your crystals, and our wish will be Ian Wright.
Yeah. Because he thought he broke the record because he took his shirt off. He had a vest on, didn't he?
And he'd equalled it.
He'd only equalled it.
And somebody reminded him, and then the same. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, great story. Yeah.
Yeah, it was lovely. Honestly, I've always told that story. I think my family are fed up with me telling them that story.
Well, that's a good claim to the fame, though, isn't it? So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, what was you mentioned Norwich and Delia Smith? What was Delia Smith like at Norwich?
I never actually met her there.
Did you not meet her there?
No, I never met her. I only got a letter from her saying that she was going to get Mike to phone me. But I just knew that there is a time where I think this is the time that I think, because we've got so many injuries. I mean, it's incredible because you have so many matches now. There's far more matches. There's far more sort of focus and pressure on the players. The one thing about LinkedIn, which I love, is that because I've got so many people I'm connected to now, and I see all their stories, and it's really interesting to see coaches and scouting people talking about their experiences. And the one thing I've picked up with sort of the physiotherapists is that they get a huge amount of pressure to get a player back before they're actually ready.
Yeah.
And I think that's really sad.
you do see a lot where players will return early from injury and then break down and out for longer then, so it negates the kind of the benefits of having them back early if they're just going to break down again. And I think a lot of thing goes behind it where, these are actual people as well, so they're injuring themselves. They might be seen as an asset to some clubs, we need him on the pitch or whatever, but these are people who actually got a physio and rehab from these injuries, and it takes an effect on their career as well. So definitely anything that can highlight potential injury risks would be beneficial. And some of the works that you've been doing with the biorhythms as well, I think that could obviously help highlight critical areas.
I give a really good example with Yoro. When he moved over here, they put him in a match which was just a friendly. This was in August. It was just a friendly, and he injured himself, and it was on a high-risk day. Now, if the manager had known in advance, you would have played the thing, hang on, it's a friendly, he's high risk, we won't play him. Mm-hmm. That's what I would do, especially as a friendly.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for a physio, that would be a tool in the toolbox. That would be really useful, wouldn't it? Yeah. You think a player's ready, but actually let's check their biorhythms to see if we're not going to get a recurrence of this or another injury. Mm-hmm. Is it ever, I don't know whether you would have had an experience of this, has it ever worked the other way where they've been in a trough, but actually their performance has not been suggestive of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I tell you what, when I say about this, that they're high risk for injury, you've got to remember these are really, really fit guys, aren't they? Mm-hmm. So what I do say is they are higher than normal for getting injured. Yeah. So I'm not saying they will definitely get injured. And there's definitely some people I can absolutely see that they have, their performance level has not changed at all when in a trough, at all. Because also their physical cycle is not their dominant cycle, so it might have been their intellectual cycle. So when their physical cycle is in a trough, you'll find there are some people that are a lot stronger anyway. They just are physically stronger, but they're so fit.
What determines that dominance? Because you mentioned that a couple of times now, where you say one player may be a physical dominance or one player may be an intellectual dominance. What kind of is that just like random? Is that something you can attribute it as part of the biorhythm?
Well, they call it a blind diary, and what you do is you can normally find within 3 months what your dominant cycle is, and so how you do that is that you don't look at your biorhythms at all. This is like in the very beginning. You don't, and any day that is a brilliant day, you say you've had a fantastic day. If you've had a really terrible day, or you know there are times where you keep dropping things, or you keep tripping up, or you keep forgetting things, or you feel particularly more angry. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you kind of like have this blind diary of writing down the days where you have what we call extremes. So really happy, really bad, tripping up, feeling really physically well. Mm-hmm. And then you'll actually find now my dominant cycle is my intellectual cycle. So I know that when I'm intellectually in a trough, I have to focus more on, I'll give you an example. If I'm doing, say, someone's bio, checking them up, if I'm intellectually in a trough, I will double check anything. I've done silly things like, say someone's date of birth is 2004, I've put 2005 because I just haven't, I don't know why. And so I always double check, because I know that if I'm like that in a trough intellectually, I might make silly mistakes.
Right, okay, yeah.
Do you think this could lean into kind of the mental health situation that we find ourselves in across society, in terms of, there's nuance to it obviously, but biorhythms, could they support in just helping people, I think, come to terms or realise that maybe today isn't going to be, a peak day for them? Just, be kind to yourself, I suppose, and just...
No, you're absolutely right. That's why they found out the 28-day cycle. They realised, one of the doctors that worked in mental health, and he was actually in the hospital with mental health, he would get a nurse phone him up about a patient who 2 weeks ago they would be on a certain dosage and it wasn't touching the patient. They were going, hang on, he's always on 2 milligrams, but we've given him 2 milligrams now and it's not touching them. They're not calming down. They're not. So that's how we got the 28-day cycle. So you'll find that the patients that are on drugs, they have to have a slightly stronger dose when they're in a trough,
Right.
than when they are positive.
Yeah. Is there kind of things, I think we touched on it a little bit, but like when you are in like a physical or emotional, intellectual trough, you mentioned there about like double checking things. Is there things that you can do to kind of help support your down days, or you like just kind of or today you're going to be you're kind of intellectually in the trough, so double check your work, or have that kind of like sense check on what you're doing. Is there any other kind of like tools like that you can apply when you're having those like dips in either obviously physical, maybe you do a light training session as opposed to, okay, we'll just do light running today and try not to overexert yourself. Whatever kind of things can you apply to help with the down days? Well,
this is the thing that you can do, because you can do in advance. So you can actually see in advance that you are, say your strong cycle, your dominant cycle is the emotional cycle, and you do know that you feel really down in the negative days. What you do is you make sure in advance, because I say most of the time, you've got to remember there's like a grey area, and it's really the peaking and the troughing that you will be affected by. So if you know that your trough is coming up on your dominant cycle, you can plan. Like, for instance, if you are, say it's your intellectual cycle and you're studying. I did this with my daughters. I used to say to them, there's no point you studying hard when you're intellectually in a trough. Just go over some things that you know. Don't learn anything new. Only learn new things intellectually when you're intellectually positive. And if it's something that's really hard, you just can't get in, I think wait till you get to the top. Then look back at something you find difficult. But with the emotional cycle, what I would do is I'd make sure I wouldn't put myself in a stressful situation.
Right, yeah.
So I would plan ahead. I'll give you an example. My husband used to do this. If someone rang him up to have a really good meeting, important meeting, he would say, hang on, I'll come back with you with some dates. Now, some people will probably look thinking he's going to see if he's booked anything else in, but he wouldn't. He would look to see when he was, was his emotional cycle. He would see when he was emotionally positive and hopefully intellectually positive. So he would book a meeting then.
Yeah. And then you can bring your best of both worlds then, as intellectually and also emotionally. So you're making, rational decisions.
Yeah.
Irrational.
So you really can use it. And as I say, the Japanese and the Americans now are really using it a lot to get the benefits out of it.
So it's being aware really of, what your state is, and then managing the kind of interactions you'll have in that day, and not putting yourself in scenarios where you could become, have negative impacts on yourself, I suppose.
But not only that, when you've been told in advance, look, you're emotionally in a trough, you know that when you get emotionally in a trough, you get a bit wound up. Just be aware of it. Don't get wound up. And in a way, it's a bit of a psychological thing. You kind of like are forewarned, aren't you?
Yeah, like we said before, expectations are set then at that point,
Yeah, it must enter your consciousness, mustn't it? And
you're tricking
behave
consciousness in you.
differently,
So
exactly.
you are almost like preparing yourself to make sure that you don't get wound up. Now, with my husband, he's a GP. Now, when he's intellectually in a trough, quite often I'll say to him, will you double check the prescriptions that you're giving out today? And I just do that. I mean, he laughs at me, but he does do it.
Yeah.
Because I've told him then.
Yeah.
So he now knows that he's just going to double check anything that he's going to do with a patient.
Planting that seed, isn't it?
It is. It's exactly. And this is where, but you know what though? I promise you, with this physical, if we are able to reduce injuries, I mean, I was shocked at the amount of how much they charge, how much it costs the industry, the football industry, when there's the injuries. I mean, it's phenomenal. We're talking about something like £39 million with Manchester United, and I thought, well, if you can reduce it by 70%, that's a huge amount of money.
It is, yeah.
So so I know that there are people out there they're very interested in the money side. I'm interested in the welfare, but there will be people out there that are interested in the money side. But that's another plus, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that sort of comes hand in hand, really, because if your top players are there to play and they're not out, you're going to make more money. You're going to have a better environment for the people, aren't you?
Yeah.
Or players, I should say.
Yeah.
Was it quite a lucrative area to be in, working with clubs, in terms of consulting for them? Back in the 90s when you were doing it, you don't have to share numbers if you don't want to. But was it you're interested in the welfare, but obviously you were, I assume, being paid for your services. Was it quite a lucrative business?
No.
Right.
Because I did not want it to be lucrative. I could have wanted it to be lucrative, but it's a very new thing, and to me, I wanted much more to be able to spread it. But as I say, it was the wrong time. Not open to it, not ready for it, and also I wasn't ready for it either, because I had lots of commitments. But money has never been, my children will laugh at this, they know that I'm not money driven at all. So to me, I want to make a difference.
More about the message than the money side of things.
Absolutely the message, because I so believe in it. And I just think this is the sort of thing I'd love to do. Is that, say, let's just give the example of Manchester United. Theirs was 39 million that they paid last year. So what I'd love to do is, if they really took it on board and really followed the guidelines of, like, even, when they do their training, they say, right, okay, you guys are high risk. They don't even have to say high risk. They could say, right, you guys are going to do light training. You guys are going to do this. And also one thing you can't do, which they used to do at Watford and at Norwich, is that, at the end, they do all their training, they do their skill training, then they would do 5-a-side or 10-a-side or whatever.
Yeah.
The trouble is, as soon as they get a different colour bib, they want to win. And so quite often they got injuries in that. So what I would do is I would say, right, you can't do the 5-a-side at the end, because that'd be contact, but you could do the warming up and you could do the sort of skill training, but you don't do any contact. So you could sort of slightly shift it, really.
It kind of seeps across the whole football area, doesn't it? You're talking about actually kind of preparing a training session now, aren't you? Yeah. That information should inform what they do as part of their training regime and their training planning. Well, so it's not even just injuries, it's just making sure players can play at the right times and not play at the wrong times. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I do, absolutely.
Yeah.
But what I'd love to do, I'd like to do a thing where it went from 39 million and then really do it well for the next season, and it's gone down to only like 10 million, and see the difference, because they've protected players on the high risk days.
Yeah,
it's fascinating stuff. We did skip over one area of your career, Rangers. You had
oh yes, that was lovely. Yeah. Actually, I was so lucky because they had a brand new they'd put up a new training thing. It was lovely. But again, what happened was they were all for it, and then something happened with me, so we had to stop it. So that.
Remember who was around at the time? The Rangers you were speaking to?
No, I can't remember. I was only speaking to the backroom staff. I wasn't talking to the. I didn't do what I did at Norwich and at Watford. But it was. I put them there because they were going to do it, but I couldn't do it in the end.
Yep. So what's your plan now for the future in terms of, obviously, your TikTok pages and your LinkedIn pages? You're doing lots of content on there, sharing your expertise. So what's your plans? What's your hopes?
Well, do you know what? I've had to go onto social media because I promise you guys, I did write to every single club and I got nothing. And I did all these different sort of things. I thought I did different ways of writing to them, emailing them, phoning them up. And honestly, I promise you, it's like you would just not believe it. It is so different to when it was back in the 90s. Because I'm not joking, you'd phone up and people, they were all landlines back then, and people would pick the phone up and they would talk to you. Yeah. But here, everything's so filtered. I don't even think you get past the receptionist. You just don't. So that's why I had to go on social media, which I feel really uncomfortable about. I don't like doing anything like this. But I thought, if I start posting up every player that's injured on their high-risk day, then someone is going to have to go, hang on.
Yeah.
This is just... So I've got so many up there now. I said to my husband, I'm not going to start writing to them yet because I want to see the body of showing them what I've put up, because they can't dispute it.
Yeah.
If it's there. That's why sometimes I feel a bit embarrassed that it's very repetitive. But the thing is, I keep getting new people seeing it for the first time. And in that one video, I have to kind of very quickly explain how it happens. So although the players are different, the actual content is very similar, and I can understand that some people are thinking, oh gosh, this is very similar. But they could just flash through and see, oh, it's that one and that one and that one and that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you looked at, say, like a team sheet this season, for example, and you say, oh, there's five there at the high risk category, and they've gone on to injure themselves, has it been like, what, or even talk about cohesion and chemistry as a football team? Obviously, if you've got five or six players high risk, they can have a poor performance and go on and lose the game. Have you seen that this season in particular, or?
No, I tell you what, I don't do that for a start. And I tell you why I don't do that, because in the past I did have a look. You remember I said I wanted to see, I saw the Arsenal match where the really good one week, and
same team.
Then the next time. I actually found these days, because everyone is so fit and everyone is so cohesive in a way, that you can't predict. And as I say, even if someone, say there's 2 players or 3 players that are high risk in the team, it's not necessary that they will get injured. And they might really play just as well because they are so fit. But the thing is that there is a high risk. And it's whether the manager and the player want to take that risk. So like, for instance, with Euro, if they knew now, I know it's hindsight, but if they knew now, would they have played Euro in a friendly?
Yeah. I suppose what you're saying there is obviously with all the strength and conditioning and the more professionalism that goes on with the day, because obviously in the 90s, was it Tuesdays?
Tuesday Club, yeah.
Tuesday Club, they go out and go have a bunch of beers or whatever. The baseline is much higher. So although you're a high risk, your base level of fitness is higher, which means, okay, you might be high risk, but it doesn't necessarily immediately correlate to you're going to get injured, because there's such physical specimens right now. So
absolutely,
it's just having that kind of like, you're in this kind of high risk category, just take it a bit easy and like you say, planning, part of the planning and performance, and tailoring their schedule to actually this person's high risk today, so let's go a bit easier on them or something like that.
But even if they just wanted to use it during training, so many players get injured during training, because sometimes they have these really, when they really push them in training. I don't know what they call it now. What do they call it when they do like
overload?
Beasting used to be called, did it?
Well, some managers like to have the players train at the same intensity as a match, and that can obviously lead to injury. Like Roy Keane was famous for it, wasn't it? If you didn't play at the same levels as you played on a match day, even though it's just training, then you didn't play in the squad. So there is that kind of, they're kind of keeping the players at the high level.
But that's quite old-fashioned, isn't it? Really?
Yes.
Yeah. I was going to say, what would you say to somebody who's maybe like your Graham Taylors, who just don't get it, don't buy into it, how would you sell it to somebody in terms of?
Well, do you know what? I don't.
Okay.
I've learned now that you can lead a horse to water, and if they don't get it, they don't get it. I mean, you can't make some. it's like, you know, if you're when you were a child and you knew how to add and subtract, and then they went on to sort of long division, and there'll be some people that get it straight away, and there'll be the other kid that goes, I just don't get it, you know, I'm going to have to. And the thing is, what will happen is that they will start looking at other teams. It will start to talk. I'd like everyone to start to talk about it.
I suppose once one invests or buys in, first door opens, it kind of opens other doors.
Yeah.
That's where you are now, really, trying to open that first door again.
I am.
To then...
Yeah.
How long does it take to collect, say, your information, or do you make that folder for, say, Venables? How much work is that to prepare, to present?
For when I got them for Euro 96?
Yeah.
Well, once he was on board and he wanted the diary, it took a couple of days. And everything would take a couple of days. It's like, for instance, if a club came to me and said, actually, we just want a diary, we don't really want to, because what I'd like to do is I'd like to teach someone, that, you know, you've got all these wonderful sports science people. Mm-hmm. This is the other thing. I think it should be a part talked about in their degree, sports science.
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
So therefore, they get to understand that biorhythms do actually affect the body. So I'd get one of the young interns that was really keen on computers and really keen to know about biorhythms, and I'd like to train that person so you can then leave them to get on with it with the with the rest of the backroom staff. I don't know what they call them now. We always just call them backroom staff. What do they call them?
I think that still fits.
Coaching team.
Yeah. Support staff, yeah.
Support staff. So the support staff in a way, having one person or maybe two people, in case that person's off sick or away, that you have, there's a group of them that understand it so they can use it. I'd love to teach them that. That's what I would really like to do, and let them get on with it. And then they can just ring me up to say, look, we're a bit confused about this. Yeah,
that's interesting, actually. You did touch on your TikTok and your LinkedIn profile. If people are interested in biorhythms, where can they find you? And what is kind of your social media accounts?
Well, I'm on TikTok, and that's at oh my goodness. Hold on, I've got to write this down. Hold on. And I have to put my
Sports
glasses
science
on.
biorhythms?
Here we are. Oh, you're so good.
Something like that.
Yeah, it is. It's you've got sports science biorhythms.
Right, okay.
So that's TikTok?
That's TikTok. Instagram is Suzanne Nelson, and it's injury_science.
Right.
And then you've got LinkedIn, which is Suzanne Olivia Nelson, and that's consultant in sports science. So that's where you can sort of monitor. I mean, even if you just want to monitor, you could follow. Because I promise you, I post every day because there's an injury every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I reckon you should try some key massive moments in history, like Stuart Pearce penalty miss, 1990.
You know,
I think that'd be good. Maybe a 1966 cup final.
Would people be
World Cup
interested?
final. 100%.
Baggio's famous miss against Brazil.
Baggio's miss, 94, yeah.
Oh,
all those
wow.
massive, probably negative moments they're going to be.
Yeah.
It's tracked if you can find the date of birth and whatnot. But that would be really interesting.
Well, I shall definitely do that.
Yeah, I even think the other way as well. So, like, if you've got a big game coming up, if you could highlight players who are in peak and in troughs, I think that'd be really interesting to, say this player is in, maybe put 10 pounds on him, scoring a goal.
Champions League final, Champions League final.
It'd be interesting.
Just put it out there and say, not predict, but based on this, I think this player will have a poor performance, maybe something like that.
But you know what? I've got to tell you guys, I will not do that, and I tell you why. Because if you get it wrong, and that player just it's almost like with your children. Your child will do something, and someone comes and say, "Oh, they've just done that," and the child will not do it. It's almost like sod's law. And to me, I really just want to focus on reducing injuries, not predicting.
You could keep it open, can you? You could say X, Y, and Z player is in the high performance category. You don't have to say they're going to have an injury or something, but you can just draw attention to the fact that
Due to their
Did-
cycle, they might be.
this is where they are at their cycle. You can just
Yeah.
leave it at that, can't you? Really, you don't have to put any negative or positive spin on it.
Yeah.
You just
Well, that I would definitely think about that.
Yeah, there we go. All right. Do you have any
No,
other
that's great.
questions?
Really interesting. Thank you very much.
All good.
Well, we really like to thank you for your time and
Yeah.
thank you for coming on the show today. It's been really interesting diving into it and getting to know a bit more about biorhythms. But yeah, we just want to thank you for your time, and we'll just thank everyone for watching. If you want to watch new episodes, make sure you subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed today's episodes, make sure you leave a like. And if you want to get involved in the debate, drop a comment in the comment section. But that's it for this time, guys. Have a world-class weekend.